The Legend of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Part 1, Chapter 68, Lobo. Written and performed by Joseph Chambers and based on the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic books created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. Michelangelo wheeled himself over to the kitchen and found the bag of dog treats had been completely emptied and thrown onto the floor. "If you weren't so cute, you would be in so much trouble," Michelangelo mused to the non-present puppy. Luckily, they had an extra bag in the cupboard. Michelangelo retrieved this and lightly shook it. The small and fluffy dog practically soared out of the small hole and, with tail spinning at the practical speed of light, looked up at his owner like he was a god. It was a look of immense joy and profound awe. "Good boy," Michelangelo praised, trying to bend down and stroke the dog, but failing. Damn! He loathed being in a wheelchair. He then sensed a pang of guilt as he thought about those who couldn't recover from their injuries like he would, and who would be stuck in a wheelchair or worse, bedbound for the rest of their lives. Maybe he shouldn't complain too much. He then collected from his pocket a small tracking chip and attached it to a dog treat. Lobo gleefully devoured this without a problem, and on cue, Michelangelo's shell cell beeped into life and displayed a map of the sewers, with a small purple dot representing the exact location where the dog stood, located right next to a white dot which showed where Michelangelo was. Of course, now the issue lay with the fact that Lobo seemed to have forgotten the reason why he'd wanted to go down the hole in the first place, so was now just standing there observing his master, who in turn observed him. "Oh, come on, dude!" Michelangelo wailed. Michelangelo, sensing this was a lost cause, began to roll away, back to the television. Maybe he could catch the rest of that episode of Doctor Who whilst Lobo decided what he wanted to do. But just as the boy began to move away, the dog made a move for the hole. "Man, you're doing that on purpose!" Michelangelo complained. He then proceeded to whip out his shell cell out of his belt pocket and watch the purple dot of Lobo move slowly through the sewers. Michelangelo did not really know what he was expecting to learn from this, but the dog did stop at one point, only a mile or so outside of the lair. It was only after he was stationary for a considerably long amount of time that Michelangelo decided to go and investigate. Less out of need or curiosity, but more out of sincere and chronic boredom. He wheeled himself out of the lair and began to travel on through the sewers. As he left, he made a silly mistake. The sort of mistake that is hard to believe one does, but nevertheless happens. He left the door to the lair slightly ajar. This may not have typically been a problem, but that was just the night when two of the most ruthless and viciously deformed creatures were sniffing out the only smell that was familiar to them, the only smell they considered family. Mutagen. Meanwhile, Michelangelo continued to follow the dog until he reached a wood door that had a sign that said "Keep Out." Here's the thing about most boys who are 11 going on 12. They are curious creatures. And if any boy of that age were to encounter such a sign, their only option, their one and only desire, the one thing that would satisfy them, is to enter said room. When Michelangelo entered the room, he was boringly disappointed by the discovery of nothing but a small room with brick walls. The walls themselves were badly damaged in various ways. Some of the bricks were cracked, others had been removed and crumbled into a fine dust on the floor, and some were peppered with small but deep holes. It was not immediately clear to Michelangelo what had been in this room, but clearly something had been, and that something was both strong and destructive. Michelangelo made the choice to leave at this point, partially because he had found Lobo and there was nothing else to do there, and partially because he was scared that the strong and destructive thing would return. Upon Michelangelo and Lobo's return to the lair, Michelangelo noticed that the door was open, and assumed his brothers had got home. Wrong. April and Master Splinter were trudging solemnly through the sewers to the lair. April had been walking with little to no sense of awareness to her surroundings. She had not been thinking of anything, and she just felt numb. It was as if she was dreaming. Nothing seemed real or felt right, natural or normal. "Are you okay?" Master Splinter asked, unable to think of anything else to say in the situation. April failed to respond for a good 5 minutes. She was unable to process the thought of anyone talking to her for that time. Then, with no warning, she suddenly burst out in Splinter's face. "How could he do this to me?" Once again, Master Splinter was unsure on how to respond to this, or even if there was supposed to be a response at all. He decided the best course of action was to say, "I would understand if you did not wish to return home tonight. I would find it acceptable if you were to stay with us in the lair, just for one night. Just promise you will tell your mum that you are staying over with a friend, and that once we have figured out what we are going to tell her, you will go home." "I will," April lied. She didn't want anything to do with her family right now. Her mum could wait. She probably wouldn't worry anyway. They reached the door to the lair, and both noticed that it was slightly ajar. Slight as this was, it meant big trouble. Splinter pushed April back before creeping up to the door and peeking through the slender gap. What he saw alarmed, fascinated, and stunned Master Splinter down to his mutant core. His wheelchair-bound son was shrieking his heart out whilst cuddling the loudly barking, although it was more of a squeak, Lobo. He had been backed into a corner by what appeared to be two giant creatures drawn straight from the pits of hell. One had a skinny crimson body split into head, torso and tail, which was about 3 feet long. 6 black spindly legs sprouted from the torso and prodded the poor turtle with curiosity. It had transparent wings that protruded from the body that vibrated every other second. Its wings had a black pattern not dissimilar to that of broken glass. The other creature was twice the length of the first and had black, beady eyes at the top of its grotesque head that appeared to be looking everywhere at once. It was a light brown, almost yellow in colour, and seemed to have 4 main legs that sprouted 2 from the front and 2 from the back. On top of that, it had at least 10 other legs around its body. Master Splinter gasped in horror at this, and April peered through the gap to become similarly horrified.